So at this point, we're going to go into our speaker for today. We're very honored to have Ranger Scott Sheads, who came down this morning from Fort McHenry. He is a historian. He works with the National Park Service, and he's their official historian at the Fort McHenry National Monument and Historic Shrine. And he's had that position since 1978. He has served as a consultant for the Star-Spangled Banner National Historic Trail and is the author or co-author of a number of books and journals on the Civil War and the War of 1812, which is going to be our theme for the next year or two. His latest co-authored book is entitled War on the Chesapeake, a reference guide to the War of 1812 in Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia. Mr. Sheads, Ranger Sheads is going to address us today on the War of 1812 in the Chesapeake. Please welcome Scott.
For those of you, can you hear me? For those of you who have never seen a National Park Ranger, typically this is what they look like. I love my hat. I want to thank Jay and Lisa for inviting me for this 3-hour lecture. I don't have to be at home. I have no time schedule. I have no social life. Before I start, am I too loud? People say I am. After 33 years with the National Park Service at Fort McHenry, I've seen a lot. I haven't seen everything, but I've seen a lot and heard a lot of stories. And I'll share with you one story, which after 33 years is at the top of my list. And what I'm about to tell you is the honest truth. Seven years ago, teacher from Baltimore City, young lady, 22, 23, came in with her 5th grade class. They were over there looking at the exhibits, and she came over to the desk, real nice lady, nicely dressed, and she asked me 2 questions. When was the War of 1812? I'm holding myself back. They call it the War of 1812 because Congress said so. And it lasted till 1815. And then I started to explain to her a few things about why Fort McHenry is a national monument and historic shrine, the only one in the National Park Service, by the way. Gave her a little 30-second spiel on the events that happened. And I said to her, you know, this is the birthplace of the Star-Spangled Banner. Now, in all my years, I have never seen someone's face light up like hers did. May lightning strike me. Oh my God. You know, that's the theme song for the Baltimore Orioles. I composed myself rather well, I thought, and I said, no, it's the national anthem of the United States. Oh, I think that's wonderful. Could you go over and tell the children that? I thought about that a great deal. How this girl got through college. But the reason behind it, I believe, that there are a lot of children out there, a lot of adults, who for some reason didn't have the opportunity to visit a museum or travel or get a chance to read a book. Somehow she slipped through the cracks. She was a very nice lady. Well, how can you get by with not knowing the Star-Spangled Banner? Well, the only thing I can think of, the only place she knew and she had heard the song was at a baseball game. And that's why I think it's very important that we get children out there to learn a little bit about not only the War of 1812, but there's a whole world out there waiting to be discovered. And as we approach the bicentennial of the War of 1812, that was going to be our duty to educate people to this forgotten war, the war we call the War of 1812. There's a timeline, and I'll share it with you. It's going to last about 3 hours. When was the War of 1812? Believe it or not, a lot of people don't know. So I'm going to give you a little timeline here, put it into perspective. It's over here. Over here is 1770. See that? 1776. That's when we got our independence from England on paper. 8 years later, in 1783, we have the victory at Yorktown and the Treaty of Paris, which ends the 8-year struggle for American independence. Now we're kind of putting a government together here. And finally, in 1788, we have a government by the people. We call it a constitution. But over in Europe, things aren't going too well. France. Cheese and wine and stuff. In 1793, France declares war on England. And there will be a 20-year global conflict between two of the most powerful countries in Europe. We'll call it the Napoleonic Wars, a 20-year struggle for power on the seas and on land. And the United States will be caught up in this. England especially has been stopping our trade on the high seas, impressing American sailors, thousands of them, off our ships, and there's nothing we can do about it. We have 12 ships in the U.S. Navy. England has over 1,300. By 1812, the United States had had enough. We were being violated for our free trade and sailors' rights. So on June 18th, my birthday, by the way, the United States declared war on England. But we're unprepared for war. Treasury is just about empty. We don't have a strong central military organization. Only a few thousand men. So now we need to raise the army up. Now we can't go over and invade England, that's too much. But we can invade Canada, next door. And so there's a cry throughout the young United States of, onward to Canada! Everybody was saying that. The 14th U.S. Infantry, recruiters like Lieutenant Wright, Lieutenant Brown, came here to Princess Anne came here to Cambridge and other small towns up and down the eastern shore looking for recruits for the invasion of Canada. One recruiter stated that he found a few good, healthy men of amiable habits and not viable to drunkenness. These are the men the United States Army needs. So throughout the late fall of 1812, there were recruiters going around the eastern shore and the western shore, gathering recruits, militia companies, such as the Dorchester Artillery Company, the Republican Blues of St. Michael's, are going out and forming companies of militia. There are 51 regiments throughout Maryland. Here in Princess Anne, walking through the cemetery one day. I love cemeteries. And just happened to be an Antioch United Methodist churchyard here in Princess Anne. Walking through, and there he was. That's what got me started on the Eastern Shore. James Phoebus, 25th Regiment. And on his tombstone were simply these words: he was a soldier of the War of 1812. This guy had a place in American history. Who was he? What company was he with? These are the questions I constantly ask myself as I dig deeper now into the role of the Eastern Shore in the War of 1812, a field that no one has really done a lot of research on. In 1812, the U.S. Army invades Canada, ends up in disastrous defeats, one after the other. The militia of New York they're not going to cross over the border into Canada because they don't want to. They're going to stay here in New York State. So the 14th U.S. Infantry invades Canada. Winter comes on, and we end up in 1813 in February. We have to remember that England doesn't declare war on us until October of 1812. How's this?
Well, my microphone's behind the podium, so if you stay back there, I'd be great.
Thanks. We're about to invade the Chesapeake Bay now. On December 26, 1812, Great Britain declares a naval blockade of the entire coast of the United States, and she's got the Navy to prove it. 100 ships are assigned to the Chesapeake Bay, declaring the entire coast of America under strict naval blockade, and on February the 5th, 1813, they do just that on the Delaware and the Chesapeake Bay. We can't get our ships out. Privateers out of Baltimore, out of St. Michael's, out of Dorchester. Can't get out because of the strict naval blockade. However, they will wait until nighttime, or maybe during a snowstorm, to slip through the blockade. They're the sea wolves of 1812. In March, April of 1813 begins the first invasion of the Chesapeake Bay. Throughout the year, British are attacking, raiding over 100 sites in the Chesapeake Bay. Havre de Grace, St. Michael's, Queenstown, Elkton, Georgetown, Fredericktown on the Sassafras, Tangier Island. the Nanticoke, the Choptank, the Wacomico River. All of these sites are visited by the British Royal Navy. So throughout the summer of 1813, there are more raids, more skirmishes, more battles than all the other 1812 sites in America put together. We are the middle ground of the War of 1812. Battle of St. Michael's. A lot of people realize that 2 battles took place there, involving thousands of men. Queenstown, the Battle of Slippery Hill. These are battles, but we don't hear too much about them. I'm going to take care of that. Winter comes on. The British go to Tangier Island, that's their naval base, while they're doing operations here in the Chesapeake Bay. And what happens now in the spring of 1814, news arrives that Napoleon, after his disastrous defeat on the road to Moscow, 600,000 men, by the time he gets back, he has less than 150,000 men alive. What the Russian winter doesn't take, the Cossacks will. By the time he gets to Paris in late 1813, he's surrounded by the Allied armies and he's put into Elba off the Italian coastline, and Napoleon's reign is over for the time being. He's going to make a dramatic comeback soon. One of the biggest stories of the early 19th century. This allows England now to gain a full attention to the United States. So in the summer of 1814, 50 British warships, 5,000 British troops fresh from the Napoleon campaigns of the peninsula arrive in the Chesapeake Bay on August the 19th, 1814. They sail up the Patuxent River. For over 6 miles, the British Navy is stretched out, and they're landing the army ashore at Benedict, Maryland. The target, Washington, D.C., 50 miles away. So on August the 20th, 1814, the British Army under Major General Robert Ross marches towards Washington, 50 miles away, and in that entire march, they're uncontested. The American Army now starts to gather at Bladensburg, Maryland. It's the only bridge left now that can take the British Army into Washington, D.C. So on August the 24th, 1814, we have the Battle of Bladensburg. But the American Army gathers at the last moment, 2 hours before the battle begins. The entire army is not together yet, so they're just hanging on. And for 2 hours, 5,000 British troops against 2,500 militia, and the battle goes on. The Americans running out of ammunition, they're being flanked by the British Army, pull back to Washington, D.C., and that opens the road for the British Army to enter Washington and destroy the capital. Well, what happened to the defense? Why weren't we prepared? Here's the story. Oh, it's a wonderful story. 3 weeks before the Battle of Bladensburg, someone asked the Secretary of War, John Armstrong, bureaucrat, why haven't you done anything? And his reply was, my God, they're not going to come here. What on earth would they want here? It's nothing but a disease-ridden swampland where much vermin and politicians abound. Thank God things have changed. Baltimore is the objective. The smoke rising up from the Capitol, the President's Palace, the Washington Navy Yard. The glow of that fire could be seen in Baltimore 50 miles away. Throughout the night, the remnants of the American Army, the militia, arriving in the city at all hours of the night, and word is the British Army is right behind them, throwing Baltimore into a panic. But by September the 12th, they've gotten their act together. Commodore John Rogers, Commodore David Porter, Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry, the hero of Lake Erie, have arrived now with their crews, and this boosts the morale of the entire city. 30,000 militia arrived from Delaware, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Maryland, U.S. Marines, U.S. Navy forces. 30,000 now are gathered in Baltimore to repel the invasion. September the 12th, 1814, the British land at North Point, 10 miles south of Baltimore, and they begin their 10-mile march towards the city. Halfway there's the Battle of North Point, a 2-hour battle. The Americans, under Brigadier General John Strucker, his only duty is to delay the British, to slowly move back towards the city of Baltimore. Not too far back, so certain people can't hear me. The British get within 2 miles of the defenses of Baltimore, and the second phase of the invasion of Baltimore begins. On the morning of September the 13th, 1814, British bomb ships began a 25-hour naval bombardment upon the fort. Lovely names. Only the British could think of these bomb ships. Etna, Volcano, Devastation, Meteor. Lovely names. For 25 hours, the British bombarded the fort with 1,500 200-pound cast iron shells. The explosion from these could be heard in Philadelphia, 100 miles away. So for 25 hours, the British bombarded the fort, but are unsuccessful. And so the Admiral now decides to take the fleet and pull away from Baltimore. The British Army cannot possibly take the city without the Navy's help, so they turn around, get back on the ships, and sail away to get ready for the next campaign at New Orleans at Christmas time. The battle for Baltimore is over. The Chesapeake Bay campaign is pretty much over. But there's an end story here. 3 miles away from Fort McHenry is an American vessel named the President, which was built in St. Michael's, by the way, in 1797. And on board that flag of truce vessel is Francis Scott Key, a young lawyer. He's been sent out by the President of the United States to negotiate the release of a friend of his being held captive. He negotiates the release of his friend, but the British aren't going to let them go yet for security reasons. So he's only detained on an American flag of truce vessel. And throughout the day and throughout the night, he watches for the flag or something to let him know that Baltimore has survived. So quite literally, on September the 14th at dawn's early light, which, by the way, is between 6 and 9 a.m., according to Webster's Third World Dictionary, he sees the flag being hoisted up over the fort. He can hear very lightly the strains of the national song, Yankee Doodle. And it's at that moment he sees the flag and begins to compose the Star-Spangled Banner. That song became our national anthem by act of Congress, young teacher, in 1931. Although it had been used as our national anthem for well over 100 years. So the flag flies at Fort McHenry 24 hours a day by special orders of the President of the United States. There's only 5 sites in the world that has that honor, and Fort McHenry was the first one in 1948. I'm going to leave you now with a little thing about the flag, and most of you have our little brochures. Some people have asked me about the 15 stars and 15 stripes. Well, that was the official flag of the fort from 1795 until 1818. And in 1818, as the country begins now, the flag is reduced back to 13 stripes for the 13 original states. So from 1818 until today, we just add a new star for each new state. So finally, I got word from the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress recommends this book, The War of 1812 in the Chesapeake, a reference guide to historic sites in Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia. It's a wonderful book. Thank you, folks.
Scott, thank you very much. A very entertaining, informative presentation.